Hello, this is Terry from Jensen, and we're going to be talking about consistent control with MiYO color and structure. So if we could get started. So what we have here in our title slide is pulling some cobalt out of a jar, and you see how it's stringing off the spatula, but it's sagging out the lip of the jar. And this is what we're looking for as our baseline of uh, viscosity for the colors. We want it to come out like a honey, but we want it to sag. So controlling consistency during the application is our consistent control. So what is a good consistency and what does it look like? Well, our baseline is going to be how our jars should be like when they come from the factory and you mix them up for the first time. It should string out like a honey or like a molasses that's cool, so that it'll come out about 3/4 of an inch or maybe an inch, and it'll sag down under its own weight. That's the ideal starting point. And this way we can always thin it down to make it more translucent or whatever kind of tint we want, or we can have it that consistency to make it nice and thick so we can jump from an A1 to an A2 or a B2 to a B3. When it's in a thicker consistency, it'll have a surface tension where it won't drift or sag or anything else like that. So it'll stay exactly where you put it. You apply it to the restoration. You come back an hour later on the sagger peg, it hadn't moved 1/10 of a millimeter. So we want that surface tension. It's a sweet spot that you don't want it too thin where it's watery or loose like a liquid, and you don't want it pasty. You want the sweet spots just somewhere in between. But ideally, for most of our application, what we want is that sweet spot where it can be applied with a brush, but closer towards the thick than the thin. So when you mix with a non-metal spatula, it generally takes me about 5 seconds to mix out of a jar. I would say anywhere between about 5, 6, 7 seconds is good. A couple times around the outside of the jar, across the bottom 2 or 3 times to disturb anything that's settled down, and stir it out again. And then I can pull the spatula out of the jar and see if it sags and check my viscosity and my consistency. So you see I pull it out and it sags down, and it was hanging there kind of like honey. And you can see how far I can string that. Now we don't want it like liquid. If it flies out there just like a liquid, like it's paint pouring out of a can, it's too loose. So you see a good representation of a consistency that works well, sagging but not yet not fully liquid. We want it to have kind of a honey or a molasses type. And you want daily mixing to ensure a homogeneous mixture in viscosity. It's 80% ceramic, 20% pigment, and the pigment will look like it's dispersed, but it'll be heavier towards the bottom after about 12 or 13 hours. So I normally mix my Shade A, my Clementine I use a lot. I use my Storm a lot, things like that. Anything I'm going to use for the day, I'll mix in the morning when I start, and it's good for the whole day. Next day I do it again. I mean, you're spending 2 or 3 seconds per well here, so it's not like it's taking a chunk out of your day. If you devote 2 or 3 minutes to this, you'll be done. It's the difference between having it turn out exactly what you want or not. And when you're doing this for a living, sometimes you got to make an investment. So secondary thinning as necessary. You see there in the flat spot, it's thicker than I want in the wells. The wells is a good base to start from, but if I want tints or I want very, very translucent colors, I'm going to put just a little bit there. That's like the size of a hole punch from a notebook paper hole punch clip. And I just put a little in there, and I have put a little bit of the glaze liquid in it. And like for the colors I want to keep thicker and have more intense, I'll leave them a little thicker. For like the coral, the mamelon effect there, I'll make that a little thinner because I want that very, very faint. And the Clementine, the second one from the left, I have that a little thinner too because I want it to be a translucent root look to it, or for the color emanating from the central fossa of a posterior. So I don't want it really, really thick in its intensity. So I'm going to show you adding and reconstituting color from a jar. And what I have here is I have the linen, and you see it's a little pasty right here. It's kind of like chewing gum. Remember, it's too thick if it's like chewing gum. You want it to be kind of like honey or molasses. So what I'm going to do is I have a colored spatula. I got less than a half a jar of material here, so I don't want to put in a lot of liquid. And after you mix 5 or 6 or 8 jars, you're going to get an idea about what it takes to reconstitute these things. So I thought about half to 2/3 of a drop. I mix it up again, mix it up real well when you're adding the liquid, maybe 8 or 10 seconds. And I look at it and it's just right. Of course, I've been using this material for about 3 years, so I've gotten used to the consistency of it. And you want to mix it up well with whatever's in your well. The time you invest in getting consistency correct makes application faster, easier, and makes your job a lot more fun. You want to use the Insync paste glaze liquid to ensure what you see is what you get. When you fire it, it fires exactly like you apply it, and it burns out cleanly. If you use some wrong glaze liquid, some of them are a little higher fusing, they'll burn out, leaving a grayish cast. Now, this is a highly polished surface just to show you how well MiYO can stick. I don't normally polish my restorations, but if it can work on this, it'll work on anything. So I'm using a clean #2 MiYO brush. It's like a 00. I clean it with water, and then I just get it lightly damp with Insync paste glaze liquid. And I have my MiYO color thinned down to give less chroma and more translucency, but eliminating surface tension. So you see it's kind of shrinking up, kind of like water on wax paper or water on a well-waxed car. Now, I have this MiYO in the middle, and this is the shade A. And what I've done is I've just taken about a dilution of about 5%. I mean, very, very little, and it goes on just like a latex paint or like a nail polish. And on the distal, you see I have it thinned down even more dilute, but that's to increase translucency. So if it's going to ball up, what do? Well, it's important to remember that as dilution increases, surface tension decreases. And this makes it really important to use the Insync paste glaze, because when we get a coat of the Insync paste glaze, which is window paint, it's colorless, it'll hold the color in place. But if the Insync paste glaze is thin too much, it suffers from the same problems that the color does. So the Insync paste glaze is a precursor to what the MiYO colors, so it handles exactly the same. So what I've done there in the middle is I've taken it from the jar and I've thinned it down maybe 5 or 6%, and a good consistency to flow and adhere nicely. So with a brush that's the size of a 0 or a 1, think of the brush that's in a nail polish applicator. It works really great for the paste glaze. And if it's too thick like sour cream, it makes it really hard to apply the color. It's misery. I'm going to tell you right now. The hardest thing for me to learn was this, because I had no one to really show me. But I'm going to explain to you that if you can just thin it down from that sour cream type body thickness of material and get it to where it lays kind of like a nail polish application, you will be there. So the red sable brush applies the Insync paste glaze more evenly and quickly than a smaller brush. So you could use a MiYO #2 or a MiYO #3, but the larger brush applies it more evenly. If you use it in a very parallel fashion, you'll be able to cover a whole restoration, like I said, in about 8 to 10 seconds. So here I am covering. I'm going to just cover the facial. I mean, this is just to show you what you need to do. So just remember a parallel stroke. You don't want to apply any pressure. You just want the material to slide off the brush. You really don't even have to bend your brush. So there's an even coat, and I'm going over it a couple more times just because that's what you do when you're on video. There's my #2 MiYO brush, which is the size of a 00 brush from Art Supply. I have some thinned down shade A. Now, notice the brush doesn't bend. It's very parallel, but no matter the dilution of the MiYO color, it will adhere to the base of Insync paste glaze. So you see, I'm not pushing the brush through the paste glaze. I'm just letting the color touch the paste glaze. Gentle, even strokes delivered in a parallel fashion facilitate the application. Now there's a thicker amount there. I didn't thin this down, and this is the dab and drag technique. Think of it kind of like when you're filling an impression with dye stone. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of vibrating it and letting it flow off the brush. This is why you have a little bit of the glaze liquid in your brush. Very little, just enough to make it damp, not enough to make it soupy. And yes, that was dirt on my crown. I edited it out when I took it out. All right, so I use a little one MiYO brush, which is the same size as a 5-0 brush. That's a 0-0-0-0-0. And I've noticed that if I just lightly touch, I don't want to push through that paste glaze, but I can kind of jiggle it and get the color to move in a very, very smooth fashion once I get some on the tooth to begin with. So you can see in the distal half of the tooth, I have the dab and drag technique for more chroma intensity. It has less dilution, more chroma, and it's more diluted on the mesial, which gives you less chroma. But regardless, the MiYO paste glaze or the in-sync paste glaze will hold it in place. So let's talk about the controlling the consistency of the MiYO structure. What is good consistency and what does it look like? Well, it's not going to be like the colors. And I'm going to show you how to adjust it. But it's basically it's kind of like a light cure composite. It's like a porcelain mixed with a glaze liquid and blotted out a little bit. It's got a lot of body to it. It's a little bit on the stiff side. And we don't want to mix this to a honey type consistency. We want this to stay very, very stiff. So with a non-metal spatula, we're going to use shear thinning, which is patting it. So basically, it's a lot like, think of squeezing a damp sponge to get the moisture in the sponge homogeneous throughout the sponge. So I'm patting this, making the moisture come up the surface. But I don't want to stir it because it would get air bubbles in it, and air bubbles will look like little pearls because they have a different refractive index. So you want to keep air bubbles out of it. So with a spatula application, I take some out. Now this is a glass slab that has a little piece of blue paper put under it. And I'm going to try to make a patty about a 1/2 millimeter thick. And this allows you to check, see if there's dirt in there or air bubbles or anything else. And sometimes it'll be sticky and it won't clear your spatula. It's kind of like chewing gum. So you can take a tissue and you can blot it. And if you blot it with your tissue, it's not going to be quick like porcelain. Because of the glaze liquid, the viscosity of it, it doesn't want to blot out fast. So think about, 10, 12, 14 seconds to blot. And then should be able to slide your spatula on it and it shouldn't stick to it like a tacky, syrupy gum. And once I get it down to about a 1/2 millimeter, I can't get it to handle much thinner than that without it just ripping apart. So that's just a little metal or little zirconia spatula I made there. Kind of reminds me of the old Belle de St. Clair spatulas, but it's not quite like that. And I don't want to, you can save all these pieces, but a lot of times I'll chop them up into little pieces like a 2-round or a 4-round burr head because they're easy to pick up with a brush. So I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to swipe it smartly, pushing down against the glass. And I'm left-handed, so I go from left to right. And you see that piece I pick up, it's just like a tile. So it's about a 1/2 millimeter thick. And I can touch it to the labial of my labial surface of my anterior, or I can stick it to my forefinger fingernail. It had a little air bubble in there, and I just pushed it closed. And you can see, you can manipulate this material, but I'll put this on the facial of my restorations. And just like I was tiling a floor, I'll put one piece close to the next piece, close to the next piece. And then once I get them as close as I can, I'll push them down with a flat brush, kind of like those paste opaque brushes we used to have. And I'll use a little bit of water in the brush. And you can use water with the structure, not with the MiYO colors, but with the structure you can, because we're not trying to see the final color. In fact, the more opaque it is, the easier it is for us to see the surface texture. So there's some of my distilled water, nicely labeled. And this will be like building porcelain, but this material is, it's got a lot of the liquid in it, so it's very tacky, very gummy. So you're going to have to dilute it down a lot. And some people like to do it with a brush. I find if I do the majority of it with the tiling type effect, like I showed you with a spatula, and I just fill in the areas I need for contour, with this technique here, it's faster for me to do it that way. But some people will want to loosen this up with a little bit of water on their glass slab, and then they can build it like they're building porcelain. Personally, if I get like 90-95% of the coverage and it's already the right dimension, I don't have to worry about getting it too thick or too thin. And while I'm talking about that and going through this, I want to mention to you that one of the biggest things that people do with structure in the beginning is they apply it too thick. Structure needs to be about 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter thick. You don't want it 6 and 7 and 8/10 of a millimeter thick, because then it defeats the purpose of the depth. You get all the depth you need in about the thickness of a business card or slightly more. When you get it thick, sometimes your color doesn't come through the way you want it to. Remember, if you have like a show card that has clear coats on top of the color that the car is, it's what makes it look so deep. It doesn't require a lot of dimension. In fact, dimension works against you. So you see, I would have already had this whole surface covered, and I would have been doing the periphery and finishing it if I'd done it the other way. So I normally take and apply most of it in those thin scales. I use a flat brush with a little bit of water in it to push them together. And then I finish off with the little pieces for repairs and fixing up and adjusting for contour. Again, it was getting really, really wet because I'm applying it with water. So here I've blotted it. There's that flat brush I was telling you about. And you can use a little bit. What I normally do is get the brush about halfway full of water, and I wipe it on my finger and get a little bit more water out. You don't want more than about 20 or 30% content of water, or it'll really get soupy. So you can see the liquid content in it now. Now it looks like it's real thick, doesn't it? Okay, there's an endo file. I'm hitting the base right there. So this is the thickness of a business card. And that's about what we really want. I mean, you can add more if you have to for a line angle or for a CEJ or something. And by the way, when you poke those little holes to see how deep it is, don't forget to close the door. In other words, don't forget to seal those little those little air holes where you poked with your endo file, because it will bake with little holes in it, and you'll be frustrated when you realize that you forgot to fix it, because you got to come back and do something. It'll show. Okay, so now I'm got a looser mix, and I can add some on top. It's just like adding porcelain now. Another thing I want to caution you about is, and this is besides the dimension, and that is make darn sure that your material is clean. You don't want air bubbles and you don't want dirt. This material, the structures for the teeth in the aesthetic kit, the window and the enamel, are extremely translucent. Nothing burns out. You would think some of the acrylic fibers or something would burn out. Nope. All dirt you get in there will be on display for you and the world to see if you don't get it out. So I normally use loops to check it and make sure. Now that MiYO number 5 brush right there, that is a piece of equipment that loves to get dirt caught in those white bristles. And you can wipe it out with your fingers, you can wipe it on your shirt, you can wipe it on your pants, and it doesn't get it out. The only thing I found that really cleans that brush is a dry microfiber towel, a clean dry microfiber towel, not something you've had around the lab for a long time. And what you're going to do is wipe it on the towel 2 or 3 times like you're stropping a razor, and that will clean out that brush. That's the only thing I've really seen that cleans the lint out of those brushes. You can't even see the lint, but when you wipe it across the crown, you will see it afterwards, because the crown, this structure material, is very sticky and it'll grab any kind of dirt. So we talked about consistent control of MiYO color and structure. I don't want to talk too long. I just want you to be happy that you saw this. And now you know you can control your structure with water. You can apply it with a spatula. You can apply it with a brush. It manipulates a lot like a porcelain that has a lot of glaze liquid in it. As far as the colors, you want to have them be similar to how they come out of the jar when they're mixed, kind of like a honey consistency, but you want to thin them down ever so slightly so that they're closer to the thick, but they will slide or glide off your brush. The only reason to thin them out more is if you're looking for a more translucent color. Again, my name is Terry. I'm with the technical department at Jensen. You can reach us if you have further questions at 800 528-5531. If you have any problems, please contact us. My email is tmq, Tango Mike Quebec, at jensendental.com. We're here to help you. We want you to be successful. And please have a great day. Take care.